everybody good?
And now, hey,
Yeah.
not his government. No, his government's great. Just local.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February 25th, 2025 Board of County Commission meeting here in Seminole County. We are going to have the invocation led by Mr. Ron Williams for Palmetto Avenue Baptist Church. We also will have the pledge led by newly hired Joe Alcala, Chief Information Officer here at the county. Pastor, please lead us.
Yes, sir. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We thank you, Lord, that this Board of Commissioners has chosen to invite the faith-based community to come in and invoke your blessings. They want you here, and it's a blessing to be able to be a part of this great community. It really is a natural choice for us. We've chosen to live in Seminole County, and our kids have, and sometimes even to the third generation. We thank you, Lord, that our community is thriving where others are dying. And a lot of that has to do with those who lead us. And so thank you for these commissioners. I pray for wisdom for them today and the courage to make the right choices, that the choices they make will be based on the principles of the Word of God and not on popular opinion. I pray, Lord, that you'd be with our first responders today and watch over them, keep them safe, watch over their families, watch over our military. Thank you, Lord, that we have an opportunity to recognize one of our own today, the Senior Master Sergeant. And so help her to know that we appreciate her service, and help everyone in this building that has served under our flag to know that we appreciate it. Help the younger generation to realize the sacrifices that have been made for 250 years so that they could enjoy the things that people are dying to get here to enjoy. Help us to realize how important this is and to be willing to fight for it. We pray for global peace as well, Lord, that you would stop the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and pray, Lord, that level heads would prevail. Thank you, Lord, for this commission board once again. Watch over them, keep them safe and healthy and in your will. Watch over their families, and I just pray that the decisions that are made today would better our community and help them, Lord, to have a backbone of steel no matter what decision they make today. Some people are not going to agree with it. And so help them, Lord, to know in their heart of hearts they've made the right choice. And, Lord, once again, the courage to maintain their convictions. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. Mr. Arcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We sincerely appreciate it. Next, we will move into our proclamation for our Senior Master Sergeant, Catherine Lee Hunt. This will be read by Commissioner Lockhart. Commissioner Lockhart.
Good morning. It is truly my honor to be able to move this proclamation to the Board of County Commissioners this morning. Catherine is one of our fabulous employees at Seminole State College, and at our trustee meeting last week, we recognized her, and so this is a double honor for me, so thank you. Commissioners, I move the following proclamation of the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners recognizing United States Air Force Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt for her outstanding service to the United States and Seminole County. Whereas the brave men and women of our Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Space Force demonstrate a resolute spirit and unmatched selflessness, reminding us there are few things more American than giving of ourselves to make a difference in the lives of others. And whereas throughout our country's history, generations of service members have answered the call to leave their families, their jobs, and put their futures and even their lives on the line to valiantly defend our nation. And whereas, for many service members, the sacrifice has ended in permanent injury or death, yet their spirit remains in the continued preservation of our freedoms and the promise of liberty. And whereas there are more than 30,000 living veterans in Seminole County who served our nation in times of peace and war, through their service they kept America strong. And whereas Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1980 and served honorably until her retirement in 2000. She was deployed to Saudi Arabia in support of Operation Desert Storm, where she earned the Southwest Asia Service Medal, Air Force Meritorious Service Medal, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, and the Kosovo Campaign Medal, among others. And whereas, after her retirement, Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt returned to Sanford, where she was born and raised, and now serves the veterans of Seminole County as the staff advisor for the United Assistance for Veterans, a student veteran group at Seminole State College. She has also worked with Pet Rescue by Judy and organized a veteran suicide awareness walk to remind us that an average of 22 veterans commit suicide each day. She was a generous contributor to the success of the 2024 Seminole County Veterans Stand Down and remains an advocate for the Seminole County Veteran Services Office. And whereas Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt has brought great credit and distinction upon herself, the United States of America, the United States Air Force, and Seminole County, now therefore be it proclaimed that we, the Board of County Commissioners of Seminole County, Florida, express our gratitude, admiration, and respect for Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt for her outstanding service to the United States Air Force and the residents of Seminole County. Be it further proclaimed that this proclamation is presented to Senior Master Sergeant Catherine Lee Hunt, along with our sincere congratulations and recognition as Seminole County's Veteran of the Month, adopted this 25th day of February 2025.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimous. Congratulations, Ms. Hunt. Please join us for a photograph.
Oh, sure, absolutely, right there, right. I swore I wasn't going to say anything because, yeah. But I truly appreciate this honor. Being a native Floridian, being a Sanfordite, because we used to be Cellaryites back in, before my time. So it really is an honor to be presented this by my home county, by my home city, and I really and truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up will be our County Investment Advisor Report. Mr. Scott McIntyre will be here to give us that presentation. I would also just ask each and every one of you in the audience, please silence your cell phones, your other electronic devices, so we don't have interruptions during today's hearing. Also recognize that Commissioner Delary was not able to attend today, but we do have a quorum here at the board. So, Mr. McIntyre, welcome.
Good morning. Okay, let's see what we got this morning. Major themes, the Fed held steady at the January meeting. That was not a surprise. There is a March meeting. We certainly don't expect the Fed is going to resume their rate cuts in March. It's a May meeting. That's probably the earliest we would expect. We can't imagine that it would be before the June or the July meeting. Tariff discussion right now is probably one of the major reasons why they're going to be on hold. They're waiting to see what's happening. We've had a lot of trouble keeping up with the tariffs. As a matter of fact, we have an analyst who every day sort of puts in what's gone on and what's come off, and it's very, very unpredictable. And frankly, the markets right now are reacting to the tariff discussion. So we're all going to keep our ears to the tracks to see what happens. In the meantime, inflation is still trending sideways. When inflation starts to move lower, the Fed will be in a position where they can cut again. But until that happens, the Fed is going to be on hold. And right now, that trade outcome is going to determine what the direction ultimately is. I changed up some of the, usually I show you a different CPI graph. This one gives you an idea, as you can see there on the right-hand side, that we have been seeing a tick up in inflation. When I talk about moving sideways, it's really more in the core issues. Energy is moving higher right now, and as you can imagine, food prices are moving higher. So In the January CPI report, egg prices were up 15.2%. That's still an issue. It looks like dairy prices may be an issue in the coming months, and coffee prices may be an issue as well. So we're not out of the
All the good stuff.
energy or food concerns. This is the Bloomberg survey that I try to share with you guys. It came out on Friday. There's a lot of information here. I'm not going to highlight all of the information. I know the audience can't see that, but you guys can. And one thing that I see amongst these 91 economists who are all weighing in on what they think is going to happen is that they've all kind of glummed around a center point. You look at CPI, everybody expects that for the next 6 quarters, we're going to be roughly around 2%. To me, that's sort of a bailout. We don't know 2%. Same thing in terms of expectations for rate cuts. These economists generally believe 25 basis points sometime late in the first half or early second half of the year, and then another quarter, probably later in the year. That's the same as the Fed is thinking. It's essentially the same as the market was thinking. These economists, if you look at the 2-year and the 5-year and the 10-year expectations, they believe that the direction for yield is downward. Between now and then, there should be a lot of movement. And that probably cues us up for where we are now. I looked this morning, Monday yields were down from here. This morning, yields were down further from here. Right now, the 2-year Treasury is at about 4.10. The 3-year Treasury is at about 4.10. The 1-year is about 4.10. The pool rates, kind of the bird in hand over there on the right-hand side, are still holding up, roughly in the 4 3/8 to 4.5 rate. And until the Fed actually cuts, that's where those overnights are going to be. So that's the bird in hand. Upcoming maturities, there aren't a whole lot. The one I'm thinking about or focused on is that bank CD that matures, and it doesn't mature until March 11th. And the clerk's office will have the opportunity to talk to the bank. My guess is the bank is willing to pay a little bit more than market so that they can keep that large deposit on. So this is going to be a wait and see. We don't know where that's going to roll because we're not at March 11th yet, but my recommendation is going to be on these securities that are maturing to check, find out what the yields are, see if it's a favorable rate to move out further, and if not, hold on to it and keep that liquid. The last 2 meetings, we've had some significant investments. There was 120 invested last time. There was 160 invested before. So we've really pushed out your average maturity longer than it's been. The idea behind that was the idea of keeping your as much of this high yield as we could into 26 and 27, and really to a degree into 2028, and we've done that. So my recommendations are to wait until these securities that are coming up mature, check to see what the rates are, and if we can roll. If not, put them into the pool rates that are right now earning 4.5% for Florida Prime, and I would expect that pool rate stays close to 4.5%, fully liquid, until June or maybe even July. So the work has been done. The work has been done the last couple meetings. And my recommendation at this point, we can come back to it. Portfolio stats, the average maturity is 428 days. And I would guess that in years gone by, we've been at 120 days at times. So that's pretty long. The mix between fixed and floating, 83% is locked in into fixed rate, 17 is floating. If nothing is, I assume nothing will be done here, the yield would dip just a little bit during the month of February and a little bit during the month of March. But for the most part, you have a debt service payment coming up in April, so we'll take care of that as well. My recommendation here is that we look at the roll on March 11th, watch the market, understand that yields are down significantly since the last couple times we bought. Thank our lucky stars that the purchases that were made when they were, and that the portfolio is a little bit longer. So we can sit and watch and see what happens with inflation and the Fed and the Trump administration. So I'm going to come back to the motion and ask you if you would for that motion.
Commissioner Lockhart.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to implement the recommendations of our financial advisor based on the report submitted today and recommend that the clerk implement the changes.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Seeing none, carries unanimous. Very good. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you all very much.
Have a wonderful day. All right, our next item up is a presentation on Destination Marketing Accreditation Program, known as DMAP, and Distinction in Tourism Update, Mr. Guy Cunier.
Good morning. For the record, Guy Cunha, Director of Economic Development and Tourism. I just wanted to start off the presentation with giving everyone the genesis of why did the Tourism Office pursue the Destination Marketing Accreditation Program. During this journey that's been this Tourism Improvement District, one of the concerns that the hoteliers had was, Guy, if we're looking at an extended term that can possibly go into decades, how can we ensure the same quality that we're receiving from the Tourism Office? So our tourism team came together and pursued the most difficult accreditation possible for the Tourism Office to obtain. That has to be renewed every 5 years. The accreditation program known as DMAP requires a destination organization to successfully comply with over 100 standards that span a variety of performance areas to gain this destination accreditation. The standards cover nearly all aspects related to the management, marketing of a destination, governance, finance, human resources, sales, communications, destination development, and research. So we partnered during this DMAP journey with Jack Wirt, who some of you may know was one of the original leaders of tourism in Seminole County. We've worked with Jack when he was over at Naples, and he helped guide us through this accreditation process. So to give a little more info and to award the plaque for the first time ever in Seminole County history, I'd like to introduce Jack Wirt.
Welcome, Mr. Wirt.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy, and commissioners, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. This is a great day. Here's an opportunity for me to come back to the place where I started my tourism career back in 1990. We started the tourism department at that time in the Seminole Chamber building down in the Altamont area, and it was a very small place, but it grew to, over the years, to about 8 staffers before I moved on to the Naples area to take on and actually start that tourism bureau there as well. Early on, we branded our operation as the Seminole County CVB, which was the way that we told the traveling world, this is the place to come for visitor information, for information on meetings and so forth, and really became the trusted source for that. But we always understood what we were really doing was economic development, because what we were doing was bringing people to the area to spend money in our community, to spend money in our businesses, and bring their disposable income to our area. That economic development thought process really enabled us to pull together both tourism and economic development. And in those early days, we pulled it together. Actually, in the audience, Mr. Bob Turk is right back here. He represented economic development. His wife also was a part of that as part of the Orlando economic development. That really put Seminole County on a stage of playing with the bigger boys, if you will. We found that collaboration worked well in sports. That's when we built the training center for U.S. Soccer out at Lake Sullivan Park. It enabled us to be a part of the redevelopment of the Sanford Airport, which got us as an international destination. All of those things together really proved that tourism and economic development can work together. That tradition, Guy has continued, and as you've seen, we're going to have a couple of opportunities here today, not only to talk about a tourism award, but also an award of a tourism improvement district, which is a real step forward, really setting the stage for great growth in the future. So we're here today to talk about tourism. Guy told you about the standards that they had to adhere to and give documentation that they were doing business like the biggest and most professional tourism organizations in the world. They met all those requirements, and they then were recognized by Destinations International at their annual meeting that they had done that. They become really one of only 250 organizations worldwide that have attained this accreditation credential. So that's really something for Seminole County to be proud of, and I'm really so happy I was able to help them in that regard. What I'd like to do is present this credential now. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to come down, maybe the other commissioners come down, and let's do this. This is a big deal for this organization, a big deal for Seminole County. And I see that logo up there. We started that back in the 90s, for heaven's sakes. Florida's natural choice was absolutely the right thing then. It still is today. So if we could do that.
And a great tourism team, of course.
Man, we need a bigger room. This is great. This is absolutely great. All right, you're right back there. Get over here so everybody. All right, I'll get you. So, to Guy and his staff, it's my pleasure on behalf of Destinations International Accreditation Board to present this credential for Destination Marketing Accreditation. This is, as I said, a big deal. The plaque doesn't necessarily do it justice, because this was a lot of work, I will tell you. So this is, let's get this right here. If you want to hold on to that.
Thanks, all y'all. Good work. It's all good. Well, understood.
All right. In the interest of time, we're going to speed through a quick tourism presentation here utilizing Smith Travel Research, our December hotel demand report. This gives us the calendar year indicators, occupancy, average daily rate, and of course our star indicator, revenue per available room. So we'll start with present, and then we'll look at what the forecast is telling us for the upcoming calendar year and beyond. So one of the clear definitions that STR has told us, Smith Travel Research, and they've been doing research for Seminole County for over 15 years, our year-over-year trends, is to expect a plateau. Their plateau is defined plus minus 3%. So when we look at occupancy here, we see year-over-year 3% increase, so that would be just slightly above that plateau at 3.3. ADR is declining 4%. What usually happens in tourism is ADR follows occupancy. So as occupancy increases, ADR will then trail a couple of months and begin to increase. When occupancy decreases, and something that we saw this year when occupancy started to soften, ADR was still high and then would begin to decrease. So it usually runs about 2 to 3 months behind. Now, the key performance indicator that we associate with tourist development tax is your revenue per available room, your RevPAR. That's what's going to show you from the hotel standpoint the closest indicator associated with TDT, and that's where you're seeing that plateau down 1.3%. Then you have your revenue and your demand that we closely track, but again, this is solely the hotel side. This is not your vacation rental side. So we took a look at, okay, let's see day of the week comparison. Let's look now, break down our Friday to Sunday versus Monday to Thursday travelers. And we see here that our weekend runs at about 83% occupancy on average for an entire year. That is extremely strong. And your weekdays at about 10 percentage points below that. So what usually triggers concern is if your occupancy is high, are we wholesaling our rooms? Are we discounting our rooms so far down that we're increasing occupancy but sacrificing revenue per available room? That is not the case for Seminole County. We have our most expensive rates on the weekend at $114.19, which then leads us to have a RevPAR, that star indicator, at $94.73 compared to $75.39 weekend versus weekday. So then we took an even deeper dive into the weekend and said, okay, let's look at utilizing Zartico data, 120 points of interest throughout the county. And let's identify all our sports facilities and see where are these weekend travelers going. So the 42% table cell there, that's the big key indicator. 42% of the travelers that utilize the sports facilities stayed overnight. That's 78% higher than any other point of interest throughout the 120 supply that we provided. With that, we're going to take a deeper dive into the sports facility visitor, and I'd like to introduce Danny, our new tourism division manager.
All right. Welcome, Mr. Tross, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. This slide just represents the sports complex actuals for last year. As you can see, last fiscal year, 23-24, we hosted 89 events, over 4,600 teams, 185,000 visitors, over 29,000 tracked hotel rooms, and over $58 million in economic impact. And the chart right there below are this year's projections for 24-25. As Guy mentioned, kind of plateau. We're looking at about roughly the same amount of events and about a 2 to 3% increase across the board in room nights and economic impact. So our projection for economic impact this year is just over $61 million.
So we decided to add a slide here just so we all know what our vacation rental supply looks like. In the breakdown of the platforms, we are more Airbnb heavy than VRBO. Those are total listings, the 1,347. The red dots on the screen there, those are your Airbnbs versus the blue dots that are your VRBOs, mainly concentrated on the southwest portion of the county. Now the forecast. Forecast is going to look a lot of the same, the plateau. So plus minus 3%, this is the latest forecast from Smith Travel Research. As we look at the occupancy percent change, we look at that row, you see all the numbers there are within that plateau range. Same thing can be said with your average daily rate. That's when you can see the trends as plateau begins to fluctuate just a little bit. ADR follows and then comes back down, the seasonality component to it. But the big key here is that revenue per available room. You are not seeing large plus 3%, greater than 3% increases all the way through the first quarter of 2026.
And this slide represents just the room nights, the net increase. We hired Hunden Strategic Partners to do our pro forma for the indoor sports complex. As you can see, in year one, they're projecting that the indoor sports complex would generate 17,000 hotel rooms, and by year 5, it reaches 29,000 hotel rooms. So essentially, this doubles our sports tourism room night production. Roughly, currently, we're doing about 30,000 hotel rooms. So this takes us from 30,000 hotel rooms to 60,000 hotel rooms on an annual basis. Next slide. And then this slide just represents the economic impact. As you can see, basically over the course of 30 years, economic impact will total nearly $1 billion from the indoor sports complex. Year one, it's $11.8 million. By year 5, it reaches $22.5 million in economic impact.
So here are the key takeaways as Smith Travel Research identified to us. It's, again, seeing that plateau effect as the major travel has began to return to major markets. We are a sub-market, so eventually it will flow to us. That eventually definition can be 1 year, 2 years. It can take time. As the economy softens, so does the travel market. So the big key here is to understand that a plateau effect is 18 months out, is being seen at least for the next 18 months. Some of our top 5 challenges that we've identified just within the state and for our tourism office, of course, we discussed the demand plateau. We know we have tourist development tax constraints. We are collecting our 5 pennies. That is the maximum that Seminole County can collect. Legislative uncertainty. We don't know if there will be. There's always discussion of expansion of that TDT. Increased competition. It's no secret. I think everyone has seen in the papers that building sports complex is not a new idea. And second, and lastly, the risk due to our venue limitations. Everything we have is outdoor complex, predominantly diamond and rectangular fields. In order for us to mitigate risk, we have to look at expanding our venue offering. With that, I open up the floor for any questions.
Any questions from the board? Commissioner Constantine, we'll start at your end and work our way down.
Thank you very much for the new slide, because it does show the significance of what those vacation rental platforms are doing. Do you have a number? In the past, you have told us that it's been increasing by 100% a year. Where are we right now? I mean, has it hit a plateau, or where are we? That 1,000?
Yes, we've seen the plateau effect there. We saw a jump from 500 to about 1,200, but it's been holding steadily below that 1,500, and those are listings. So one property can have multiple listings. On Airbnb, they can even list rooms. So one property can have X amount of rooms and have X amount of listings. So that's the key definition there. Is it's not 1,500 properties throughout the county. It's 1,500 listings.
And since they don't have the same regulations as hotels, they can be anywhere. I mean, has the hotel industry done, and I know that they are concerned, but have they done any studies on the effect of what that does to their occupational percentages?
I can take a look on the regional or statewide. I'm fairly confident the study has done. From our perspective, we have not done that study. That is something that, if the board would like, we would be more than willing to facilitate that.
I just think probably the Central Florida Hotel and Lodging Association probably has those numbers and would be easy to get. But this, if this was a hotel, it would be by far the largest in Seminole County. And they will not be talking about later, are they going to be they're not going to be part of the TID?
No. Vacation rentals for the upcoming ordinance are not included. They're hotel properties. One of the things, trends-wise, to look at vacation rentals, and we get more in-depth in this during the Tourist Development Council, they usually trend anywhere from 20 to 40 at most % occupancy.
Yeah.
So it's not a major disruptor. Now, vacation rentals are in other counties a major disruptor. For Seminole County, we haven't seen that, but we're definitely willing to do more research.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lockhart?
I don't have any more questions for you. We had a great briefing. I appreciate the time that you spent going over. I won't take time now to do that. But congratulations to you all and the whole team for the work that you've accomplished in what feels like an incredibly short period of time. I think you were on a fast track to get this done, and just very impressed and excited. So good work.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hur?
I have no questions. I also got everything in briefing, but I would say that I am absolutely not surprised that you came through that with flying colors. Everything that you do is really top-notch. Congratulations, Danny, on the promotion. Well-deserved, and to the entire team, just really, really, really solid work. We appreciate you.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate you giving this presentation. That way I have to zero briefing as sitting on this board to my fellow commissioners. You all did a great job. But as usual, our economic development team and our tourism team is, bar none, one of the best in the Central Florida area, and you guys have done great work delivering good products, and not only for the citizens, the hoteliers, and all the businesses here in our community. The one thing that I would respond to Commissioner Constantine's, I've read quite a few research articles here in the last 6 months that the VRBs and all those things are slowly going by the wayside, because what's occurred is the tax cost for some of these people to maintain multiple units and not have them occupied has become a burden on these owners to maintain these statewide. So we're seeing a big influx of these coming on the market, which many in the real estate market believe this is a good thing, to get these back in the hands of our everyday citizens that live, work, and go to school here. So it'd be interesting to know what some of those numbers are, but happy to share that with you, Commissioner Constantine.
And Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I didn't bring up, but I think it's important also, is that so many of these are not individual homeowners that are renting their homes.
Right.
They're corporate.
Correct.
And that obviously is, I think, a major indicator of the increase in the cost of rentals to single-family homes. And we've talked about that before, but I would suggest to you that they're having a crisis in many other places about corporate purchases of homes, to the point that I saw one was an entire subdivision that was purchased before it went on the market.
Right.
All for this type of platform.
Right.
So it has got to be a major cause of the increase in rentals for individual citizens.
Sure. Well, Commissioner Lockhart.
Well, I just have to say, I love an Airbnb every now and then. Because when you travel with adult kids and dogs, and I mean, $400 a night at the Aloft, it gets expensive when you got 2 rooms. And so Airbnbs have their place, and I'm glad that small business owners and large business owners have the opportunity to provide that service.
Nobody's
And
saying it.
I'm just putting it in there, just so it doesn't look like we're bashing anybody.
Thank you all very much. We sincerely appreciate you all being here today and the time you've invested to give us this presentation. And congratulations. Good work.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Next up, we're going to move to our consent agenda. If there's anyone here that is going to desire to speak on any of the items on the consent agenda, please grab a form. Ms. Dominique here on the front will hold a form up. You can grab those in the lobby, put your name and information on it, the item which you wish to speak about. bring it up to her, give it to her, and as we get to these items, we'll call you up to speak if you desire to do so. Now I'll move to Ms. Kate Latour for the rules of public engagement on the consent agenda. Ms. Latour?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Florida law provides that members of the public shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard on propositions before the Board of County Commissioners, except when the board is acting on emergency or ministerial matters or conducting a meeting exempt from the requirements of the Sunshine Law. Individuals shall be permitted 3 minutes each for public comment or 6 minutes when the individual is an official representative of a formal association or group. The chairman may modify the maximum time for public comment at his sole discretion when appropriate. Public comments on quasi-judicial or other public hearing items will occur during the board's consideration of those items this afternoon. Public comments on pending procurement matters or on non-agenda items shall not be permitted at this time. Members of the public desiring to make public comment must fill out a speaker form and present the form to staff. Forms are available in the lobby. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Latour. County Manager, are there any revisions, deletions, changes in the County Manager's agenda items 5 through 24?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I have no changes to the consent agenda.
Okay. And there's been no request for a constitutional officer change on agenda item number 4, correct?
Correct.
Okay, we will move to board. Anyone on the board have a desire to pull any of the items on the consent agenda for separate consideration?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item 6.
Item 6, Commissioner Constantine.
And forgive me, sorry, go ahead.
Also, there's a couple proclamations in here, so once we're done with this, we will come to the floor for any photographs that those who desire to have a photograph of the commission can do so in their proclamation. Okay, Commissioner Lockhart.
Item 14.
Number 6 for Constantine, 14 for Lockhart.
And the only thing that, I really don't need to pull it necessarily for separate consideration, but just to make a clarification, the agenda detail says that I voted against that item.
Okay.
And my recollection is that I voted for it at the time that it came before us. So if we could just ask the county manager and county attorney to work with the clerk's staff and just figure out how to correct that record, maybe.
Will do. Okay, fair enough. So we won't pull 14, we've just clarified that. That's okay with you, Commissioner?
Yes, I just wanted it to go on the
Sure.
record before we voted on it, that I have a different recollection.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Herr, anything that you desire to pull?
No, Chairman, I'd be happy to make a motion for approval of item 4, 5, and 7 through 24.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Constantine.
And I just wanted to make sure that motion included the consideration of the vote. Yeah, okay, good. Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the fact that we have reduced the reading of the proclamations to mostly just the veterans, and the rest of them go on consent, and that is, I appreciate it, but I've been called by a number of folks and they're here today about something that I think that we're all, familiar with and is very important, and that is the recognition of the International Women's Day and the recognition of the Women's History Month. And so I would appreciate if we could, that we could have that in the record. If you, I would acquiesce to one of Commissioner Herr or Commissioner Lockhart, if they would like to read that proclamation. But that's the only reason that I have pulled it, sir. And I do appreciate what you have done in reducing the amount of this. This is not a precedent setting, but I do believe that because they're here, I just thought that it would be appropriate to allow them the opportunity.
Okay.
Commissioner Herr, go ahead.
All right. Commissioners, I move the following proclamation of the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners recognizing Women's History Month in Seminole County, Florida.
If you want larger font.
The young one thinks I need larger font. And I do. Whereas in March 1980, President Jimmy Carter issued the first presidential proclamation declaring Women's History Week to align with International Women's Day, March 8th, which has been recognized across the world since March 1911. And whereas the following year, on August 4th, 1981, the U.S. Congress established Women's History Week as a federally recognized commemoration of the accomplishments, perspectives, and experiences of women in the United States with a joint resolution. And whereas, throughout the next 5 years, Congress continued to pass joint resolutions designating 1 week in March as Women's History Week, authorizing the President to issue a proclamation urging people to celebrate the contributions of women in U.S. history. And whereas the first Women's History Month was proclaimed in March 1987 by President Ronald Reagan with Proclamation 5619, and states, "From the earliest times, women have helped shape our nation. Historians today stress all that women have meant to our national life, but the rest of us too should remember with pride and gratitude the achievements of women throughout American history. Those achievements span a wide range of human endeavor. They have not been attained without the quiet courage and sacrifice of millions of women, some famed, most not." And whereas President Reagan's proclamation continued, women have established themselves in business and in professions, and today women outnumber men as undergraduates at our colleges and universities. Women have fought for moral and social reform and have taken part in and led many great social and political movements of our land. Women have founded many philanthropic, cultural, educational, and charitable institutions. Women have served our nation with valor and distinction during wartime, nursing the wounded, piloting airplanes, performing vital jobs in defense plants. Women have forged a place for themselves in public life, serving on the Supreme Court, in Congress, and in cabinet posts, becoming ambassadors and holding federal executive posts that affect the lives of every citizen. And some even become county commissioners. It doesn't say that, but I thought I'd throw that in. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners do hereby proclaim March 2025 as Women's History Month and call upon all Seminole County residents to honor the sacrificial service and leadership of women in our county who joyfully serve their fellow citizens, families, businesses, charities, educational institutions, and houses of worship. Be it proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners of Seminole County, Florida, that the proclamation be spread upon the official minutes by the clerk of the Circuit Court in Seminole County, adopted this 25th day of February 2025.
Second. Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Seeing none, carries unanimous. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
Or both commissioners. We will, Dominique, I want to make sure there's no public comment forms on any,
Do a picture with the folks who are here?
we will.
That's what he's doing.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
No, sir.
I didn't think so. Very good. So, and we will move on to anybody that desires to have a photograph taken on the proclamations. Please join us down the floor, and that will conclude our consent agenda. Thank you very much.
We're going to look right here first at this camera. Then one more here. On my count, in 3, 2, 1.
Don't move, I'm gonna get a selfie there.
All right, next we'll move on to our regular agenda items. This is item 25. This will be presented by Mr. John Slott, Public Works Director. Mr. Slott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board of County Commissioners, I'm John Slott, the Director of Public Works for the county, and I'd like to, before we ask for your authorization, we'd like to give you a brief presentation on Hillview, and I'd like to introduce our project manager on this, Joe LaFaso.
Joe, thank you, Mr. Director.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And your name and address for the record?
My name is Joseph LaFaso. My address is 100 East First Street, Sanford, Florida.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow commissioners. My name is Joseph LaFaso. I am a professional engineer working with Seminole County Public Works. Today it is my privilege to give this presentation on the Hillview Drive Drainage Improvement Project Resolution of Necessity. As an agenda for the presentation, we will have a brief project overview, a project timeline review, a discussion of the resolution of necessity, and our requested action. So this project began in 2016 with resident complaints about flooding along Hillview Drive. When Seminole County staff went out to investigate, they concluded that the solution would be a CIP project to address these concerns. The project would have 3 objectives: roadway safety, pedestrian connectivity, and stormwater control. To help pay for the funding of the construction of the project, county staff secured a FEMA HMGP grant in December of 2022. In order to accomplish its objectives, the project would convert the roadway to a curb and gutter section, add storm inlets and structures, which would then pipe the stormwater to a new stormwater pond. It would also install sidewalks for pedestrian connectivity. These improvements would require between 50 and 60 feet of right-of-way. To date, the project construction cost is at $4.8 million. $3.9 million of that amount will be covered by the HMGP grant. To review the timeline, in August of 2019, the work order for this project was approved. Immediately thereafter, design and permitting began for this project. By June of 2022, design and permitting had completed. The project was let for construction in September of 2022. On March 4th, 2023, construction began. The first part of the project to be constructed was the stormwater pond, and that was actually completed in July of 2023. However, in August of 2023, when construction moved to Hillview Drive itself for those part of the improvements, it was discovered that there was right-of-way discrepancies on the corridor. From that day in August of 2023 till now, February 2025, county staff has reached out to the owners of the properties affected by these discrepancies in an attempt to negotiate the purchase of the portions of the parcels that were impacted to create that 60-foot right-of-way corridor. Although they've met with some success, there are 17 parcels, those that are listed here now in this item, for which those negotiations unfortunately proved fruitless. Now, the important thing to remember at this point is that 1 year from now, in February of 2026, the current grant funding timeline expires. FEMA has indicated that they are willing to give one further extension for 6 months to the middle of July 2026. However, after that point, no further extension would be granted, and that 3.9 out of 4.8 million would be lost. So where does that leave us at this point? Well, the project, in order to go forward, requires property to be acquired to create the right-of-way necessary for the improvements. We've had 1.5 years of negotiations, which have stalled, and now if we need to accomplish this project in a timely manner to keep that $3.8 million in funding, we will have to proceed with a resolution of necessity in order to use the eminent domain power to acquire that property without risk of losing the grant in a timely fashion. The eminent domain power is entrusted by the people to the government in order to necessitate the public good, but it's not a power that should be taken up lightly because of the grave implications of its use. But in order to ensure that the project is for the public good, there are 5 points which must be considered. The first point is the availability of an alternate route. Hillview Drive is an existing road that sits situated centered between the structures on either side of it. Moving Hillview Drive would not avoid any of the right-of-way takings because the majority of the road is on private property. In addition, moving it would not actually increase the ability to address the concerns, but rather would cause additional impacts to those adjoining parcels. So there is no alternate route that's going to avoid these takings. Secondly, the cost of the project. We've already discussed the amount of money that would be lost from the grant should we not be able to proceed forward in a timely manner with the acquisition but the construction cost is based upon those elements which are needed to address the objectives of the project. If we're going to do what the project intends, then we have to pay to construct the curb, the gutter, the sidewalks, the storm pipes, the ponds. That's a fixed cost. But as to the amount of money that would be spent to acquire additional property, this design has been made as narrow as possible to minimize the amount of property that would have to be acquired in order to house those improvements. So it is the design that would most reduce the cost of property acquisition in order to make this reality come to life. The third is environmental factors. Currently, the water just washes off the road into the roadsides, causing flooding. This project would be designed to keep that roadway runoff within the right-of-way and off of adjacent property. In addition, by piping it to the stormwater pond, that pond is going to provide some treatment where currently that water just sits untreated on the roadside. So there is an environmental benefit to this project's existence on this corridor, and all these improvements have been reviewed and permitted by the St. Johns River Water Management District in order to ensure it complies with all necessary regulations. Fourthly is long-range planning. Within the Seminole County Comprehensive Plan Update of 2023, there is an objective DRG1 deficiency correction. Within that objective are two policies, DR 1.2 deficiency correction and DR 1.4 right-of-way acquisition. This Hillview Drive project aligns with both of those policies, thus fulfilling Seminole County's commitment in its long-range planning for infrastructure improvement. Fifthly is safety. Again, the entire basis of this project was a safety improvement to the corridor. It was going to improve that safety by separating the vehicles from the pedestrians, by adding sidewalks. It was going to improve safety by reducing flooding, and it was going to improve roadway safety by getting the stormwater off of the road into the drainage system as efficiently as possible. So this project's entire nature is safety-driven. So at this time, given these considerations, county staff would request the authorization to make binding written offers to property owners and to request to adopt and authorize the chairman to execute a resolution of necessity for the Hillview Drive drainage improvement projects for the parcels so listed. This concludes my remarks, and I thank the board for its time.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak on this matter?
Yes, sir. One speaker, Joseph Lofaso.
And that was myself. I was not.
That's why I was asking the question.
I'm like
Like,
director slot. It said all who wish to speak without exception, so I didn't wish a clerical error at the last moment to
now
occur.
you know why I asked.
We love engineers.
Yeah, I was going to say, typical engineer follows the instructions to the T.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I'll close public input on that item and move to board direction. This is Commissioner Constantine's district, or any questions by the board?
No questions.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to congratulate the project manager because also he was very judicious in his report, very accurate, very complete, but short and sweet. Thank you very much. I will move that we allow the authorization to make binding written offers to property owners and request to adopt and authorize the chairman to execute a resolution of necessity for the Hillview Drive Drainage Improvement Project, parcels 101, 102, 104A, 104B and C, 106, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 118, 119, and 120.
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Carries unanimous. Thank you both very much. We can sincerely appreciate your presentation this morning. Next item up is going to be our work session. This is going to be Mr. Jose Gomez, Development Service Director, and Eliza Liano from Kimberly Horn, our consultant.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners. Jose Gomez, Development Services Director. As you'll recall, early last year, we adopted our Land Development Code based on our Envision 2045 comprehensive planning updates. This is the continuation of that work. That work is never really finished, so we are continuing with our work sessions this year to continue to update our Land Development Code based on that Envision 2045, as well as input from staff, the Commission, and citizens on some other areas. So with that, this is the first work session, and now I'm going to turn over to Eliza Giuliano to give you the presentation.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
For continuing to come back.
Happy to. I was going to say, I'm not an engineer, and I did not fill out a public comment form, but I think my name is on the agenda, so it's okay. As Mr. Gomez mentioned, we are working on your land development code again. So the question we want to make clear that we answer is, we just adopted an update. What are we doing back? So to describe the nature of that update, there were big changes and small changes. The biggest change was that everything was reorganized. So the zoning chapter was reorganized to make it clearer and more understandable, and we always envisioned that essentially as a platform where, now that the code is more understandable, it might result in the identification of more needed updates. So that is one reason we're here. There were targeted and important updates that were made as part of that last land development code adoption, which included the establishment of the county's first mixed-use zone. But those were fairly narrow, and much of the code was substantively not changed. So some of the impetus for these particular updates are you adopted a update to the comprehensive plan recently, which happened after these updates were envisioned and adopted. So the updates to the comprehensive plan then result in updates to the land development code. There's also been issues identified by the community or by staff that need to be addressed. Some of those have been noted since the update, and some of them were noted at the very end of the last update, but too late to be included. So this is the timeline. We're here at the first board work session on this topic. We have not started drafting the code updates yet. We wanted to get your input both on whether some of these items should move forward, and for all of the items, get guidance on the major issues before we start drafting the details. So that starts with this work session. We will come back with at least one more work session to deal with issues that are also envisioned to be addressed during this update, and potential more follow-up after that. We expect to be doing the actual code drafting over the summer and then coming back to you in the fall with the adoption hearings. So today we're going to talk about 5 things: fence permitting, I-4 signage, general signage, the PD approval process, and the centers and corridors overlay. There is an extensive list of topics that are going to be addressed in future work sessions. So you see that here, from affordable housing to open space to walls and fences, and a number of other issues that have been identified having to do with ADUs, rezoning criteria, impervious surface ratio, among others. So I won't belabor you with all of that. You'll see it. You'll see it again later. So let's start with fence permits. So right now, a permit is required for any fence or fence repair that happens within Seminole County. The maximum height of rear fences is 6.5 feet for the side and the rear. It has to be lower in front yards. There are a number of peer jurisdictions that don't require fence permits under certain conditions, primarily for single-family properties or duplex properties. So, for instance, in Orlando, Pinellas, and Hillsborough County, a permit is not required for fences that are 6 feet or less and made of a material other than masonry and block. The reason for that masonry block issue is because it is more structural and starts to bring in building code, and at that point you really do need a permit, regardless of how wonderful the wall is. Longwood, within the county, does not require permits under the same conditions. Walton County, Palm Bay, or other counties that don't require fences under these conditions, as well as Bradford and Polk. Now, it's not true of all jurisdictions. We do have some neighboring jurisdictions that do require fences under these circumstances, such as Orange, Volusia, and Lake are similar to where the county is now in terms of requiring fences permits under all conditions. So the recommendation coming out of the review of these neighboring counties is to no longer require fence permits for single or two-family residential properties. Of course, that still means that doesn't get them out of complying with the code. They still have to comply with all of the elements of the land development code. And this, again, would only apply, similar to the peer jurisdictions, to fences made of wood, vinyl, or PVC. We've also had comments that we maybe should add aluminum to that list, which is kind of the traditional wrought iron fencing that we could consider adding as well. Permits would still be required under certain conditions. For instance, in corner lots, you're dealing with site sight distance issues, which have to do with traffic safety. When you're next to a lake or a wetland, there's obviously concerns there where additional review might be required in certain types of easements. There's also, accompanying this is a recommendation, I mentioned earlier that the current fence height for side and rear is 6.5 feet. If we are going to go with this, eliminating the permit requirement, the recommendation is to make that 6 feet so that we don't put residents in the situation of having that ambiguity of if they are, at 6'3", now they need a permit. So easier just to make that consistent with the permit requirements, because when they go above 6 feet, that again throws them into building code requirements. So that's not something that the county would be able to waive the fence permit on. So if we keep the side and rear at 6 feet, it's not really a significant difference, but it is going to keep them out of that building code issue. So what are the benefits? Why are we talking about this? Well, it's essentially reducing the burden on the county's residents, as well as efficiency from a government standpoint to reduce staff time devoted to processing these permits. And we also see situations where residents are getting a code violation for not having a permit, even if everything else is in compliance. So eliminating those code violations. Now, one of the challenges could be that if they don't go through, if residents don't go through the permit process, then they might incidentally have a code violation because they don't realize that they're violating the code. However, what we see is that's happening anyway. And in addition to those, you have the violations that are merely not having the permit. So that's fence permits. I'll keep moving and hold questions to the end, unless...
Mr. Chairman, as we go through each one of them, I don't know if it's going to be easy to go back to the fence. So I just have a very quick question on fences.
Okay, why don't we, is that going to serve everybody the best, just stop after each?
Okay.
Let's just have a short Q&A after each of these, so go ahead, Commissioner Constantine.
Well, the only thing, you mentioned it, that there might be some problems if we don't do the permitting on fences going into water bodies. How do we, I think that's the way you were trying to say it, or going into, yeah. So how do we rectify that or ensure that we're not having a problem there, whether it be navigation or, depending upon what it's made of, pollution,
So what we're saying is that while permits for most fences for residences wouldn't be required, if you are next to a water body or a wetland, you would be required to get a fence permit. So you would go through that permitting process and avoid any environmental issues that might result of not going through the process.
I didn't hear that. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Mr. Lockhart.
That was one of the questions that I had during my briefing, is that, word will get out very simply. Seminole County no longer requires fence permits. It will be reduced to that.
Period.
And while I agree, frankly, I do agree with it, because I don't know very many people who actually pull the permits to begin with, but I do worry about communicating what would be required for corner lots and lakeside, and what we would have to, I think, be very diligent about communicating what is required, because someone's going to wind up very unintentionally violating code. And so is the building permit at 6 feet, or the building department permitting at 6 feet, is that something that we just did, or is that something that is building code across the state?
That's a building code issue.
Across the state.
Right.
Okay.
Which brings up another question. What about fences around swimming pools? Isn't there a requirement by the building codes that there has to be some sort of fencing around building codes?
Or screening.
Yeah, screen or something like that. But, I'm just trying to make sure that we're not unintended missing something here in the whole process.
I think it all comes down to communication and making sure that we're diligently getting the word out.
And I'll add, this is why we're here. So we haven't drafted it yet. We love more recommendations.
Commissioner Herr.
So I actually think the word for the communication plan is proactive diligent communication. And that's the game changer, is that we can't be communicating after the fact. So we know who all the constituents are around this. We need to get it out to them before they get it out to the rest of the market, and it's not our message. I'm the one that asked for the aluminum to be added because at the risk of getting called out by Commissioner Lockhart, in the gated neighborhoods, we're required to use the aluminum fencing, and so it, in essence, is the same thing as a vinyl fence. We just got to get it in there. But I thought the plan was great. I think it gets us out of the bureaucracy that we're currently stuck in and makes us friendlier to do business in.
So my take is, as I shared with some of you during the briefing, was it's got to be very clear what is actually going to trip a permit process and be delineated very clear. And to the point of Commissioner Lockhart, the public's only going to hear no longer need a permit to do a fence, which then still includes our folks from code enforcement to go out and verify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So initially, I don't know that you're going to cut back on that. But I want to play the devil's advocate just one moment on the made of wood, vinyl, and PVC. So chain link fence, I'm assuming would be permitted at the right height.
Require a permit?
Meaning allowed?
Be allowed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No permit.
No permit.
Correct, which is a metal. So what if I wanted to take old car hoods and doors and build a fence out of it all the way down both sides of my property out of that metal? What prevents me from doing that under this code?
I have a neighbor who has done that, by the way, for the record. And they've integrated all of those materials into one structure. It's quite eclectic.
So, under, as written, we could add, if we add chain link to this list, that would allow chain link, not metal. So I do think it's important to be specific about what's allowed without a permit. Now, of course, if there's nothing in the land development code that prohibits that situation, then it would still be allowed with a permit. It
Sure.
would just go through that process.
So same question, if I wanted to go out to the landfill and scavenge a lot of plastic remnants and just build a fence out of leftover plastic debris that the citizens have decided to get rid of in this community and build a fence out of it. Those are the kinds of things, of course, those are obscure, rare events, but we got to know it's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen sooner or later.
We could explicitly exclude salvage or require new materials. I'm not sure if that would be the desire, but
Yeah, I don't know, because arguably you could buy a used fence from somebody and re-erect a used fence, or, it's just something I've contemplated since our briefing and going over how we make this as clear as possible and not have some poor citizen that's next to somebody that says, I don't need a permit, and here's the reason why. I can make it out of vinyl, PVC, wood, whatever.
Yeah, and I would just request, what is the flavor of the board in terms of, is it that something that you don't want to see where somebody is using scavenged material? Is that a concern? So give us a little bit of feedback on whether this is something that you want to make sure that somebody would have to come in for a permit, or whether it's something that, if it's a material very similar to wood or vinyl, or whether it's something that we could have some discretion on. So I just want to get a little bit of feedback on that.
For me, I don't know that it's reused or recycled materials so much I have a concern with. It's what could likely happen, and we've heard Commissioner Lockhart's point, she's got a neighbor that has something similar to that. I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
But I do
Some
think
people
it's a
like
code violation.
vinyl fences, some people like metal fences, some people like wood fences. And maybe I'm a guy that says, you know what, I like the appeal and arts of just going to get a bunch of old car parts and make a fence out of it. It meets the criteria of the materials, but we have residents that are obviously not happy, probably on three sides, with such a fence. And I think that's the danger we get into. So although I support this and I believe government should be less involved in these kind of matters, I don't know that we are going to cure all these code calls, building calls, interpretations of what is allowed and not allowed, unless we get pretty darn specific, and I'm not sure how we do that. I mean, our council could work with building department and so forth. Maybe somebody wants to build a fence out of old guitars.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Commissioner
the aesthetic question comes into play. which is
Correct.
what-
Or
what
painting
to get a little
pictures on a fence.
Hey, I've got pictures on fences at my house.
Be careful
You know
here.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Commissioner Hurd.
So,
I have one.
so the question is, what's the flavor? I want fencing materials to be used for fences. So we are here not to protect the person that wants to do that in a neighborhood, but to protect the neighborhood. It's for the greater good that I serve. So I don't want to prohibit salvage. If you can find a decent fence somewhere in a trash pile, go for it. But if you're finding trash to build a fence out of, that is a different situation. And I can't imagine we can't find words that would put that more eloquently into the code. I just think we have a bigger issue in terms of property values for the surrounding neighbors, and I'm not willing to harm them.
And
that's the point. Exactly.
Yeah. If I could just
Commissioner
add-
Lockhart and then Commissioner
Oh, okay.
Constantine?
No, go ahead. Commissioner Constantine's already got a thought.
Okay.
I think to add to that, it's public safety and public health.
True.
Those are the two things that I would, if you find a way to incorporate that as to, you can't do that. I think that's what we're all trying to get to.
Correct.
That, I don't care if they go in and salvage something and build it, as long as it's, it's not public health problem and a public safety problem. And quite frankly, I hate to, it's in the eye of the beholder beauty. That's the
Right.
scary part
That's
when
right.
you talk about aesthetics.
Sure.
So I don't really want, and there is nothing about aesthetics in the building code. So, we're talking about public safety and public health.
Well, then you're getting into design standards to that point. Commissioner Lockhart.
Right. And I think a lot of the neighborhoods that we're talking about may already be in homeowners associations that would dictate that it has to be a certain material and fencing. I hate to say that for me, my answer is probably going to be, it depends. Because I have seen some really creative, lovely fencing that's very artistic, that's made out of materials that's not fencing. And especially if you live on a lot that is not in a traditional neighborhood and you're, not offending a neighbor, why shouldn't you be able to do something artistic and creative on your own property if it's not, harming life, health, safety issues? So I'm going to be it depends. And I don't know from a code violation perspective that the neighbor that I'm referencing has a lot of other issues right now, in addition to the fencing material, that I believe is already an open code violation. I think what they have done is considered a violation currently. So maybe that wording already exists and we just don't know it.
Yeah, right. What I was going to add before Commissioner Lockhart stated what she stated, which I agree, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. My recommendation would be normal, commercially acceptable fencing materials, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you want something built out of all car parts or recycled materials or something, a process where they could come in, but the problem with that is now you're developing design standards, in my opinion. I'm not sure we want to be in the design standard business because that goes back to the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some people like metal, some people like wood, some people like chain link, some people like vinyl. I would think something along commercially acceptable, available in the marketplace fence products. I don't know that somebody's going to develop a recycled water bottle fencing product unless it's molded into a PVC panel. Just a thought. So those are the concerns I have. I'd support it 100%. We don't want to exchange one problem for the other, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to clarify, nothing that's being proposed would allow any fences that are not allowed today. It just changes the process, and I think all of this conversation helps us in drafting it.
Well, with that said, if we're going to update the policy, if there's anything else in the existing policy, this would be the time to update it.
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to I-4 signage. Currently, the sign code does not allow for pole signs taller than 15 feet. There are some existing taller signs near I-4 interchanges, either due to grandfathering or being measured off, depends on where you measure it from, or variances. Our understanding is that there have been variances granted to this in the past. So the recommendation is to look at 3 intersections, State Road 46 interchange, Lake Mary Boulevard, and 434 interchanges with I-4, to consider a quarter mile around those intersections for allowing taller pole signs in the future, up to a maximum of 40 feet. Why consider this process? The intent would be to reduce variance requests and associated staff and board time, as well as to ensure that all applicants are being treated consistently who are requesting something different than the standard 15 feet.
Is that it for?
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Commissioner Lockhart?
Something that I brought up in my briefing was, if I am someone who owns a property that does not happen to be at one of those identified interchanges, what was the rationale that we used to select those and not select others? And the answer I got at the time didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So I want to make sure that if we are picking some and not others, that we have a very clear, rational reason for that, and that it can be identified, because I guarantee you, somebody that has a property at another interchange is going to say, well, you did it for these, why not mine? So that, if that's just something that we could make sure that we're on top of, that'd be helpful.
And we can certainly do additional analysis before proceeding with this.
Anyone else? My question was, during the briefing, what happens if FDOT comes along and erects a sign outside these specifications that blocks the existing sign for a retailer?
And we did follow up on that, and the county doesn't have any control over FDOT signage. So presumably this would provide those commercial entities with more visibility than the existing regulations, but the county doesn't have any discretion to regulate FDOT.
Which I understood, which we talked about in our briefing. I think there's got to be some way to make sure that there's the ability for our business that resides here, by going by our guidelines, to file some kind of grievance to be considered. And my business is a victim of this, and this is why I know this so well, is after I obeyed with not only the county and then the city codes to erect signage on one of my businesses, I then had FDOT come through 9 months later and erect signs that blocked 2/3 of them, which defeated the purpose of me spending tens of thousands of dollars to even erect the signs in the place that I did. And that's a concern that we don't always know, but if there's some kind of process, maybe we check with FDOT to really figure out if there's any collaboration. I'm sure there's a book, engineering book, says this sign has to go at this height, blah, 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 blah. I won't tell you how I cured the one at my business, but anyway, I think there needs to be some kind of appeal process or collaboration process with the other jurisdictions, and rightfully so. I mean, FDOT and those need to put evacuation signs up, directional signs, informational signs, and so forth. But I'd like to see something considered, if we can, in that realm. Okay, next, please.
Okay, general sign code updates. So for the last two, we were really looking for direction on where to move forward. This is more of just a high-level update on what we're doing with the sign code. The one of the substantive changes is, or the major substantive change is taking the pedestrian-oriented signage that's now available in the Oxford overlay and making those available county-wide. Oxford overlay was one of the first areas in the county that really looked at more of a mixed-use walkable environment, and now that we've got mixed-use zones elsewhere in the county, it makes sense to extend those signage options to other areas of the county. A lot of the other changes are really just language changes to make the code more modern and understandable. So right now, the code refers to point-of-sale signs. Really, they're just talking about commercial signage, and there's not necessarily a reason to make that distinction. There's also some seeming contradictions between prohibition on freestanding signs, whereas ground and pole signs are permitted, and really, technically, those are the same thing. And then one other language change is right now the code refers to billboards as outdoor advertising signs. Really the common language that everyone uses to refer to those is billboards. So our recommendation is to update that so that it's more understandable to the public. We also are looking through the code to make sure that it's compliant with the federal case law. And that's about it in terms of the sign code.
Any questions? Zena, thank you.
Okay. PD approval process. So I'm going to start here with an update actually on what happened in the last update that was approved last January. So there were significant updates to the PD ordinance back in the last process, which were adopted in January of 2024. One of those, for instance, is the PD section has always had a list of benefits to the county, but the language before said may include some of the following benefits. Now it says must include. So the code now specifies, it has more teeth in it in terms of what those benefits would be to the county. The list of benefits was also revised and updated. There were also requirements added that PDs must meet or exceed arbor ordinance, so that PD can't be used to avoid arbor ordinance requirements, as well as minimize transportation impacts. There's a new requirement that applications have a justification narrative that says why they can't do what they're trying to do under the existing code and why the benefits to the county can't be achieved under the existing code. So again, really putting more on the applicant to prove why this is going to be beneficial to the county, and they're not just using it to kind of skirt existing code requirements. There are also new requirements specifically for residential PDs to essentially deal with, address improved design within those, including that lots less than 45 feet must be rear loaded, as well as putting additional requirements on the types of open space that have to be provided within those residential PDs. So with that, we did identify collectively with staff a couple of changes that would be beneficial to add additional areas where we don't want the PD to provide flexibility to avoid existing standards, essentially. So one of those is the buffer requirements. The buffer code already has a considerable amount of flexibility, and we believe that that can really address the situations that would come up within a PD, and so there's not a need to have additional waivers to buffer requirements within the PD process. Another addition there is that the PD process can't be used to avoid overlay standards. Overlay standards are typically written to deal with a specific geographic area, and we don't want people applying for PDs specifically to avoid those overlay standards. And finally, as we mentioned, we updated that list of greater benefits criteria. One of the proposals is to add to that list the native plants, pollinators, and wildlife corridors as a greater benefit option. So not that PDs have to do that, but that it qualifies as one of the greater benefits if they choose to do that. So with that, I'm gonna ask the question and then add additional context. So the question to you all is: are there other additions that you see a need for to the PD process, understanding that it was recently updated and you may not have had that many chances to review projects under the new process? Also, the other context that we want to add here is that in the next work session, we will be talking about updates to zones that are allowed in the LDR that would potentially push more projects away from the PD process and towards a more conventional process by allowing smaller lots within LDR, but with more requirements, generally similar to what you would get out of the PD process. So with those caveats, the question to the board is, are there other changes to the PD process that need to be considered as part of this?
We'll start at Commissioner Constantine and work our way back down. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, maybe not specific changes, but on this dais, I have heard conflicting, sometimes, discussion as to whether, we want the staff to be negotiating some improvements with PD, and then up here, sometimes I hear others wanting to say, well, this is not the appropriate place, and it should be staff. Then some people say staff shouldn't be doing it, this is the appropriate place, but then it's not unseemly, or that, I've heard of that word, or maybe I haven't, but that's what I got out of it. Unseemly that we are making, that was the vibe, that we're making, that we're making, changes up here, and that's not really the place. So maybe I don't want to be so specific that we don't have flexibility, but, maybe some sort of process as to how we go about, because I believe strongly that if a development comes in and wants to do PD, it's normally because they want, obviously, it's because they want something that benefits them. Usually it's more density. So there has to be a real intent on our purposes to ensure that if they're getting that the benefit to the community is greater than if it was just straight zoning. That we're getting something, the citizens are getting something for that density, and that density will be valuable because of the other things that we're getting. So where that happens is the question, and I don't mind it happening here, although I don't think we're the experts. And sometimes, off the top of our head is not the greatest place, but there are some things that we want to do. But I do want to empower the staff to be able to do that under the conditions that they understand what would be beneficial to that community. So that's just a comment. That's my comment.
Okay. Come right down the line, Commissioner Lockhart, then Commissioner Herr.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think I'm going to be very careful about how I thread this needle. I think we are still new in the additional updates that have just been added, and I think our staff is still new in working with some of these updates. We have new staff members also, and I think we're going to need to work together to find that happy medium that you're talking about, to allow staff to have the flexibility to help get things together before they maybe get here. Because otherwise you do wind up with that back and forth that can go south, or we could have maybe done something even better if we'd taken more time. I'd like to live through a couple of more and see how it works, and be, kind of be gracious with everyone through these next few, because we're knowing that it is new. I think one of the things we have to be very careful about, and I would ask the county manager to think about how to communicate this to staff. The criteria that we established as, these are the things that you need to have two, right? Like pick two from the Chinese menu. Those have to be legitimate. Like, you can't try and shoehorn in something because you have to pick two, and so, well, this sounds good. We'll come up with a way to make that one work. Yes, we want to be helpful to people who want to develop in the county, but we don't want to help them get around the reason that we put these criteria in place. So it's a balancing act that I think the county manager and the county attorney working with their respective staffs are going to have to work their way through. until I'm willing to say that I want to change it yet.
Commissioner Hart?
I think the work you've done addresses all of the major concerns that we've dealt with in the 5 years that I've been sitting here. I think it is too early to add others because we may, by adding others, undo the work we've already done because it's not been tested. The push to move from PD to conventional is appreciated. I think that solves a lot of issues, that if the conventional worked really well, we wouldn't have the need to go to PD. I am the one that raises the issue about negotiating from the dais. I've been very open about that, and I think Commissioner Constantine, you said it perfectly, is that we are not the experts, and we could actually be asking for things to be done that are not the best possible solution. And I've seen us ask for things to be done that everybody knew couldn't be done, so they said yes to it, and then they knew it wasn't feasible. So we got nothing. And I would also throw out there that I think one of the things that happens when the developers know that they're going to come in and have a negotiation that takes place from the dais, they're going to hold back on staff.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to give staff every single item that they could give them, and that's where I want it to be given. And I would do that if I were them. I do that in negotiations all the time, because I know who's coming at me for just a little more to get the win, and we hold the win back. So I do think that talking about it openly, and I appreciate you bringing it up because I would have forgotten to, is really healthy. But I think we all want the same goal. We want that benefit for the county and the neighbors and all of that, and not to see them erode the way that they have eroded over the past 5 years, some of the rules. And District 5's been a victim of it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, so I concur with pretty much everything that's been said. I've been very vocal about staff level reviews from the standpoint of equal treatment under the law. There has been numerous occasions in the, 8 or 9 years I've either been on P&Z or sitting here as a commissioner, watching approvals for a PD that was given latitude on this project, but not this other project, when arguably they're basically identical. And that sometimes is a changeover in staff. In other words, it's 2 or 3 years later, and there's a new staff member that didn't do things that, and a lot of it's interpretation. It's the structure has to be rigid enough that we give clarity to staff on where their ability to make decisions are, where they start and where they end, and be consistent across the board. The problem, however, is when you get into where this county is going to face over the next 30 and 40 years is redevelopment. Now, it's hard to have a conventional zoning process when you're a county who's pretty much built out. You're trying to plug things in for redevelopment in areas that arguably may be commercial, industrial, maybe montage of stuff that have entitlements from way far ago. And then the one slide, this whole ideology of you can't treat the entire county as one. I agree. I would love for us to have no more traffic in this county. But the reality is our mobility fee is set up in sectors purposely for the mobility that exists. So to have this vision that we would ever reduce traffic in the spine corridor of this county on 1792, Ronald Reagan Boulevard, and that whole center area, I don't know how you get there if you're trying to do redevelopment and do the mobility fee that you can support for the fees that you charge. So I think the PD has to be looked at slightly different on what this board is really trying to drive this county to look like, both based on its mobility fees, based on future economic development, and based on what land's available and what arguably will be mainly redevelopment in the core spine of the county. An example is, I don't know that you can treat a PD proper the same way on, say, 1792 and Ronald Reagan, or 1792 and 434, the same way that you would treat a PD, say, out on Orange Avenue or somewhere else in the county. I think That's where we sometimes get into the weeds, and I know that's a more complicated model to try to figure out, but if you're going to try to do one size fits all, we may hamstring the redevelopment corridor of this county. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's what my concerns are.
Mr. Chairman, if I could I add something?
Sure.
So I know one of the priorities of this board when I came here a couple of years ago was look at this whole process, not only the PD, but the development review process. And Mr. Gomez has done that. He's revamped it. We've received, I should say, a lot of positive results working with our community members, our businesses. We've heard a lot of your concerns about PDs, so having Jose now over the development services, he understands that, so he's involved immensely in every project that comes through. And I want to thank Kate Latour, our county attorney's office, because what they have done with bringing Ms. Borkert on board, she's involved. They work hand in hand and to ensure that that just like this, if we're doing a PD, we're getting something out of it as a greater benefit and good for the community in there. So I agree with some of the comments we've made. It's like with these new changes that we've made, let's go through it as, you know, we work things out, and then if we see some issue, we know what to bring to the board and what we can handle at a staff level. I've always said this to Mr. Gomez, if anything's in question, what do? We bring it right to you all to make that decision.
Right. Yeah, and I concur completely. And to the point of the spine of the county is bringing a benefit to the community. So is it abandoned strip mall where drug activity takes place and is derelict? Should it remain because they can't move forward in a PD process because we've got so many oversight things and requirements, it can never be developed into anything tangible that's affordable to develop. And that's all I'm saying. I would argue it's a benefit to the community to get it on the tax roll, clean it up, make it a viable community once again. And I think that's where we're going to struggle a little bit on how we mold and figure that for certain parts of the county. Obviously, in my district, District 2, and probably a majority of Commissioner Delari's in the rural area, this is a non-issue. I mean, it's just not going to have a PD out there. I mean, probably not in my lifetime anyway, but in the core and other districts, it's going to be a problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say that, my concern with PDs was that it wasn't what you're suggesting, because I believe in redistricting, in redevelopment is our greatest opportunity to improve this community.
Right.
It's going to happen. I've been through it way back in the 90s with Altamont Springs and the changes.
Right.
So things will change for the better.
Right.
And we have to be flexible. And that's why we also have to never take away the opportunities that might exist up at the dais, even though sometimes, you want to limit it, but you need to have that. But in the in redevelopment, what we're talking about and what the difference is what we've seen recently is just, what is straight are residential coming in and wanting a PD because they can squeeze in a few more units here or there or something else like that. And there is a difference between redevelopment and that. And that's, I think, also the difference between when PDs are good in redevelopment and when PDs are just useless for the citizens.
Sure.
Okay?
Agreed. That's why I think it's important. If we're going to have a new PD policy, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all. There's got to be enough movement or delineation on portions of the county, whether it's redevelopment or new development, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll leave that in the hands of the experts to figure that out, but that was my concern, that we just don't kill redevelopment.
And Chairman, I do have a follow-up question, if appropriate. The direction seems to be that we don't need big changes to the PD at this time. Does that include the 3 bullets that we had mentioned on the previous slide in terms of these recommendations?
No.
Those are good. We're talking about the process more.
But you asked for other.
Yeah, indeed. I just wanted to clarify, because I asked implied question.
Yeah, but to that point, back to the spine of the county, I have a strip mall, dilapidated, derelict, has not a single plant or piece of grass on it. It's all pavement and concrete.
2 points on that. I will add that one of the greater benefit criteria is crime prevention, so that may address that. And also, prior to the last update, again, the county had no mixed-use zone, so every mixed-use project was forced to go to PD, and that's no longer the case. So, again, we haven't seen, I don't believe we've seen an application under that process yet, but hopefully there will be one soon.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay.
Seeing none?
And with that, we will go to our last section, core overlay, urban centers and corridors. So this comes straight out of the comprehensive plan update. The comprehensive plan update significantly updated the centers and corridors section of the comprehensive plan. One element of that was the requirement that a core overlay map be created within the Land Development Code. That actually came from this board, because when you looked at the urban centers and corridors overlay map, you said, gosh, this covers a lot of area and not all of those areas are the same. So we created within the comprehensive plan the opportunity for the board to essentially refine this map at the Land Development Code level in terms of where the biggest bonuses would be permitted and where lower bonuses would be permitted. Again, the intent of the urban centers and corridors is to encourage walkable, compact redevelopment. Properties within the centers and corridors have access to increased densities and intensities, and per the existing policy, if any portion of the site is included, then the full site is part of that centers and corridors overlay. As part of the policy that was written within the comprehensive plan, essentially what it said is that the core overlay should be, at a minimum, the overlap between the centers and corridors and the core mobility fee area within this map. So that essentially is the area between I-4 and 1792, as well as along 436. So when we overlay those two maps, essentially what we get is this, the orange area being the core overlay area. Now those maps don't quite line up, so we lined them up, and that is, that's one reason we wrote at a minimum in the comp plan, so that we're not strictly bound by that overlay, because if we were, you would see stripes along 436, distinguishing between the quarter mile and the half a mile. We made those lines match, which is well within the policy that's written in the comprehensive plan. Of course, not all of the land within these centers and corridors, which are defined off the major roadways, are governed by the county with respect to land use. So this map shows the properties that actually are affected because they're unincorporated. And then, as we mentioned, the policy, which is on the bottom right of this slide, core area overlay, which shall include at a minimum the urban corridors and centers within the core mobility fee area, allows for the board to add, now or at any time in the future, additional areas to that. The one area that we had identified so far that might make sense to add would be this area of West 434 that's highlighted in the image. The reason behind that is that there is both looking at the physical attributes of the area as well as a septic to sewer concept plan, which was done, which recommended the expansion of sewer services to try to get people off septic and onto sewer within that area. So the idea being that extension of more development options to this area might incentivize some redevelopment, which usually the private sector has to choose to connect to that sewer line, even if that sewer line is provided down the street. So some redevelopment of those sites might fund on the private side, them connecting onto the sewer, as well as create more tax revenue for the county to fund and maintain the expanded sewer system. So that was the thinking there. Again, the county, the board is not required to include that area and could add it in the future, or could consider adding it at this time. And just a couple more slides. So wanted to clarify that for mixed-use projects, which would receive the maximum bonus available, do have to go through a rezoning process in order to rezone to MUCD. So they're not automatically gifted with these bonuses. They have to go through a process. There are some projects within the missing middle overlay which could go forward without a rezoning, but they're fairly narrow because they're based on the underlying zoning. So if you have a low underlying zoning, you're allowed one additional typology. If you have a little bit more intense underlying zoning, you're allowed a few more typologies. And that doesn't nominally limit the density, but it effectively limits the density because you're not allowed to do apartment complexes. And then lastly, there is also a new compatibility policy that was adopted with the last comprehensive plan update. We've already built a number of compatibility standards into the recent code updates, such as maximum height within 100 feet of residential single-family lots within the MUCD, as well as certain other compatibility policies. But we do have the option as part of this process to further implement that policy by adding more compatibility standards to either MUCD, MM, or any of the other affected zoning districts. And with that, this presentation is complete and happy to take any questions.
I would be in favor of including the West 434 corridor. My 2 cents on that portion. We'll start, Commissioner Herr, work our way down.
I think you've actually done everything we asked for. It is exactly as we expected, so I'm good with it. I would also I'm happy to include it. I would defer to the district commissioner on that.
Ditto.
District Commissioner.
Okay, and I'll be brief. I agree with the 434 and the West Corridor. We've talked about that before. I think, and the other issues that you have brought up that will continue to be discussed. I just wanted to throw out some more just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. We're going to have ongoing discussions of septic to sewer, as we've talked about. We have landscaping, and I did want to bring up, and I have brought up to the county manager, a couple of things that have occurred recently, because these things are, as we know, you said that this is a living, breathing document. A couple of things just over, and I was going to bring this up at our later on in my discussion of my report, but at the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council awards, Diamond Awards, Marion County received an award concerning edible landscaping. And interesting enough, but it's part of the University of Florida's new development of Florida-friendly landscaping, which also they had something at the last Florida Association of Counties meeting, and meeting with some of the doctoral members of that thing when they had now the new Center for Landscaping Conservation Planning. So it puts landscaping and conservation together, just something, and I did pass it along to Joe. Jose, excuse me, Joe. I know a Joe Gomez, so it's always hard. I always want to say Joe, please forgive me. And also, we've continued to discuss in times, again, about, as you said, the buffers, open space. I think that's an ongoing discussion. But one I wanted to bring up, and I've discussed with the county manager, and it's all what the county chairman has said. In redevelopment, one of the things that I've always thought that was sad when we didn't take advantage is that doing underground utilities. When I was a child, Hurricane Donna came through Florida, and that was like the only hurricane. It was a big deal. That was 1960, and I was a child, and they let me go out and look at the hurricane, that's how bad it was.
And for the record, I wasn't born yet, so.
I think my mother trying to get rid of me. Go look at the hurricane. Yeah, go play in the traffic. But the fact of the matter, we all know, the hurricanes have become more and more prevalent. They're not going to stop. And the fact is, what is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and not, and expecting a different outcome. We have poles all over the place. When we do redevelopment in this county, we should be looking at underground utilities throughout. And I mean in new development as well as redevelopment, because the fact of the matter is, the power companies get reimbursed, no matter whether they put in poles or they put in underground utilities. And it has been proven that you're going to lose less energy usage, and it's safer for all the citizens to have underground utilities. So I think we need to look at that as we're going through this land development code, and consider the opportunities that exist in there. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not the expert. I'm just saying that's something that we need to really consider as we start to move forward.
Mr. Lockhart?
I think it definitely is something that I would be open to learning more about. In sitting down with a couple of folks from, are they Progress or Duke now? I keep forgetting. Duke, whatever.
Check every month.
I know. I have FPL, so I don't pay as much attention to Duke. But one of their comments in having that discussion with them several years ago was that there are positives and negatives to both, and that when there's flooding and the lines are underground, they have to wait for the water to recede to get to the work that might need to be done. And that was actually, I think, problematic over in the Aliquot Lakes area a couple of years ago. When you have big old trees and you love them, and you have above ground power lines and poles, it is a mess. And but I would want to know the advantages and disadvantages of both before going further on that.
Commissioner
That's
Herr?
what we need, research.
I have nothing else. I think we had already gone to the end. My hands are waving around.
With that, we'll stand adjourned till 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.